Middle of the night panic call from desperate parents. I'm Brianna Walsh, 32, successful marketing director living my dream life in Seattle, when I received that frantic call at 1 a.m. My parents were screaming, crying about Tyler being arrested, needing $22,000 immediately for bail. Something felt wrong about their hysteria. Parents who raised me to be independent suddenly begging, threatening emotional manipulation about family loyalty. Heart racing. I agreed to help but decided to verify first. One phone call to police station changed everything. The truth behind this emergency will destroy my family forever. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Trust me, what happens next will blow your mind, so stick around because this family betrayal goes deeper than you could ever imagine. My life in Seattle had finally reached the stability I'd worked so hard for. As a marketing director for a tech company, I'd built something I was proud of. My downtown apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, my reliable income, my carefully planned savings account, everything represented the independence I'd fought to achieve since leaving my small hometown in Oregon 8 years ago. I'd always been the responsible one in the Walsh family, the one who studied hard, worked multiple jobs through college, and never asked my parents Carol and Dennis for financial help once I graduated. That's why the call at 1:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night felt so jarring. My phone's shrill ring cut through my deep sleep like a knife. The caller ID showed Mom, and my heart immediately started racing. Late-night calls meant emergencies, hospitals, death. I answered on the second ring, my voice thick with sleep and worry. "Brianna, thank God you answered." My mother's voice was pure hysteria, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "It's Tyler, honey, it's your brother." In the background, I could hear my father Dennis shouting something I couldn't make out, his voice carrying that edge of panic I'd only heard twice in my life, both times when someone ended up in the emergency room. "Mom, calm down. What happened? Is Tyler hurt?" I was already sitting up, switching on my bedside lamp, my mind racing through possibilities. Car accident, overdose, fight, the usual suspects when it came to my 28-year-old brother who'd never quite found his footing in life. "He's been arrested, Brianna. Drug possession. They're saying he could go to prison for years if we don't get him out tonight." Carol's sobs intensified, and I heard Dennis grab the phone. "Brianna, listen to me very carefully." My father's voice was strained, desperate in a way that made my stomach clench. "Tyler needs $22,000 for bail right now. Tonight. If we don't get this money to the courthouse by 6 a.m., he's going to be transferred to county jail, and we'll lose our chance to help him." 22,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. "Dad, that's a huge amount for bail. What exactly is he charged with? Does it matter?" Dennis snapped, and I could hear Mom wailing in the background. "He's your only brother, Brianna. Family comes first. We raised you better than this." The guilt trip landed exactly where it was supposed to. Growing up, family loyalty had been drilled into me from birth. The Walshes stick together. The Walshes don't abandon each other. The Walshes help family no matter what. But something felt off about this whole situation, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Of course I want to help Tyler, but I need details. What police station is he at? What's the case number? Let me call and see if I can work out a payment plan or... No. Both parents shouted simultaneously, their voices overlapping in a way that made me flinch. "We're handling all of that," Carol said, her tears suddenly seeming more controlled. "You just need to wire the money to our account and we'll take care of the rest." We already talked to a bail bondsman who explained everything. "Mom, that doesn't make sense." If you're working with a bail bondsman, they usually only require 10% of the bail amount. That would be $2,200, not $22,000. My marketing background had taught me to question inconsistencies, and this one was glaring. "Brianna Marie Walsh, your brother is sitting in a jail cell right now and you're arguing with us about paperwork." Dennis's voice turned cold, using my full name the way he had when I was 12 and caught sneaking cookies before dinner. "We gave you everything growing up. We paid for your college education, we supported your dreams, and now when your family needs you most, you want to play detective instead of helping your own flesh and blood. The emotional manipulation was working, and I hated myself for falling for it. Guilt washed over me in waves. Maybe I was overthinking this. Maybe my parents were just panicked and not explaining things clearly. Maybe Tyler really was in serious trouble and needed my help immediately. Okay, I'll help. But I need to know which police station he's at just so I can. Time is running out. Carol interrupted, her voice sharp with an urgency that felt almost rehearsed. Every minute you waste asking questions is another minute Tyler spends in that horrible place. Do you want him to suffer because you couldn't trust your own parents? I looked at my savings account balance on my phone. $22,000 would wipe out most of my emergency fund, money I'd been carefully building for years. But if Tyler really was in trouble, if he really needed help, how could I say no? He was my baby brother, the kid I'd helped raise when our parents worked double shifts at the factory. The one who'd called me crying when his first girlfriend broke up with him, who'd asked for my advice about everything from job interviews to which classes to take in community college. I'll need a few hours to arrange the wire transfer, I said finally, hating the way my voice shook. The banks don't open until 9, and I'll have to. We'll send you the account information right now, Dennis interrupted. There are 24-hour wire services. We already looked into it. That should have been my second red flag, but exhaustion and emotional manipulation had clouded my judgment. Of course they'd already looked into 24-hour wire services. Of course they'd thought of everything. They were desperate parents trying to save their son. But as I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of my dark bedroom, one thought kept nagging at me. In all the chaos, all the crying and shouting and demands for money, my parents had refused to give me a single concrete detail about where Tyler was being held or what exactly he'd been charged with. They knew the exact bail amount but couldn't provide a case number or the name of the arresting officer. Maybe I was being paranoid, but something about this whole situation felt wrong. Very wrong. And before I drained my savings account, before I potentially ruined my financial security, I was going to verify their story. Just to be safe. Just to make sure I was really helping my brother and not falling victim to some kind of scam. I had no idea that this decision to verify their story would uncover a web of lies and betrayal that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. Sleep was impossible after that phone call, so I spent the next few hours pacing my apartment, replaying every word of the conversation. The more I thought about it, the more inconsistencies I noticed. My parents had been oddly specific about some details, like the exact bail amount and the 6 a.m. deadline, but completely vague about others, like which police station or what Tyler had supposedly been arrested for. By 5 a.m., I couldn't wait any longer. I called the Seattle Police Department's non-emergency line, explaining that I was trying to verify information about my brother's arrest. The officer who answered was polite but confused. "Tyler Walsh, you said? Can you give me his date of birth?" I provided Tyler's information and waited while she searched the system. "Ma'am, I'm not showing any Tyler Walsh in our custody. When did you say this arrest occurred?" My parents said last night, but they didn't specify what time. My heart was starting to race again, but this time with a different kind of anxiety. "Let me check yesterday's bookings as well." Another pause. "No, ma'am. No Tyler Walsh has been booked into King County facilities in the past 48 hours. Are you sure about the spelling of his name?" I spelled it out letter by letter, provided his middle name Robert, even gave her his social security number that I'd memorized from helping him with job applications over the years. Nothing. No Tyler Walsh in the system anywhere. Maybe he was arrested in a different county. I suggested, grasping for explanations that would make my parents' story true. "That's possible. You might want to try Pierce County or Snohomish County. Do you know where the arrest took place?" No, my parents didn't say. Which was another red flag I'd somehow missed during the emotional chaos of that phone call. I spent the next 2 hours calling every police department and sheriff's office within a 100-mile radius of Seattle. Pierce County, Snohomish County, Thurston County, even reaching out to departments in smaller towns where Tyler might theoretically have been visiting. Every single call yielded the same result. No Tyler Walsh. No arrest. No record of my brother being in any kind of legal trouble. By 7:30 a.m., I was staring at my phone with a sick feeling in my stomach. Either my brother had been arrested under a fake name, which seemed unlikely, or my parents had lied to me about the entire situation. But why would they lie about something so serious? What could possibly motivate them to fabricate an elaborate story about Tyler's arrest? That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I knew it sounded extreme, but $22,000 was too much money to hand over based on a story that was becoming increasingly hard to verify. I found a PI named Jake Morrison who specialized in locating missing persons and agreed to pay him $500 to find Tyler within 24 hours. Most people aren't as hard to find as they think they are, Morrison told me during our phone consultation. Social media, credit card usage, cell phone records, there are lots of digital breadcrumbs. If your brother is in Seattle area jails, I'll know by this afternoon. While I waited for Morrison to work his magic, I decided to call my parents back. Maybe there had been some miscommunication. Maybe Tyler had been arrested in a different state, or maybe they'd gotten confused about which jurisdiction was handling his case. Brianna. Thank goodness. Carol answered on the first ring, her voice still shaky but noticeably less hysterical than it had been a few hours earlier. Did you arrange the wire transfer? Time is running out. Mom, I've been calling police departments all morning and nobody has any record of Tyler being arrested. Are you sure you have the right information? The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. When Carol finally spoke, her voice had taken on a defensive edge. Of course we have the right information. Do you think we'd lie about something like this? The police must have made a mistake in their computer system. These things happen all the time. But Mom, I called 6 different departments. The chances that all of them made the same computer error. Brianna, I don't have time to argue with you about police paperwork. Dennis had grabbed the phone, and his voice was sharp with anger. Your brother is sitting in a cell right now and you're worried about computer glitches? What kind of sister are you? The accusation stung, but it also made me more determined to get answers. If Tyler is really in jail, then give me the name of the arresting officer. Give me the case number. Give me something I can verify independently. We don't have those details memorized, Carol said, back on the phone. Everything happened so fast. The important thing is getting the money together before it's too late. Then what jail is he in? I'll drive there myself and verify that he needs bail. Another long silence. When Dennis spoke again, his voice had turned cold and calculating. You know what, Brianna? Maybe we made a mistake calling you for help. Maybe we should have known better than to ask our daughter who's gotten too big for her britches since moving to the city. Maybe Tyler was right when he said you'd probably abandon your family the first chance you got. The words hit like a slap, and I felt tears sting my eyes. But underneath the hurt, anger was building. Something was very wrong here, and my parents' refusal to provide any verifiable information was making me more suspicious by the minute. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said quietly. I'm trying to help Tyler by making sure I understand the situation correctly. If he's really in trouble, if he really needs bail money, then I'll help. But I need proof. The proof is that your parents are telling you he needs help. Carol shouted. Since when do you need proof to trust your own family? Since right now, I thought but didn't say. Instead, I told them I needed a few more hours to arrange the money transfer and hung up. At 2 p.m., Jake Morrison called with news that made my blood run cold. I found your brother, he said without preamble. Tyler Walsh, 28 years old, currently in Las Vegas, Nevada. He checked into the Bellagio Hotel yesterday afternoon using his credit card. According to social media posts from his girlfriend Crystal Monroe, they're celebrating some kind of windfall. Posted photos from expensive restaurants, shopping trips, the works. Whatever your brother is doing in Vegas, he's not in jail. I thanked Morrison and transferred his fee, then sat in my office staring out at the Seattle skyline while my world tilted on its axis. Tyler wasn't in jail. Tyler wasn't even in Washington State. Tyler was in Las Vegas spending money with his girlfriend while my parents tried to extract $22,000 from me using a completely fabricated story. The question was no longer whether my parents had lied. The question was why. And as I started to dig deeper into my family's recent history, I was going to discover that this wasn't their first attempt at financial manipulation. It wasn't even close. Armed with the knowledge that Tyler was living it up in Las Vegas instead of sitting in a jail cell, I made a decision that would change my relationship with my family forever. Instead of confronting my parents immediately, I decided to investigate how deep this deception went. If they were willing to lie about Tyler's arrest, what else had they lied about? I started by calling my cousin Jake, Dennis's brother's son, who lived in Portland. Jake and I had always been close, more like siblings than cousins, and I remembered him mentioning some family financial drama about a year ago that I hadn't paid much attention to at the time. "Brianna, good to hear from you," Jake said warmly when he answered. "What's going on?" "Jake, this might sound weird, but do you remember that emergency situation with my parents last year? You mentioned they'd asked you for money for some kind of medical bills." The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, that," Jake said, his voice suddenly guarded. "Yeah, I'd rather not get into family drama, you know? Jake, I think I might be in the middle of the same kind of situation right now. Can you please tell me what happened? I think my parents might be lying to me about Tyler being in trouble." Another pause, then a sigh. "God, I was hoping this wouldn't happen to anyone else. Your parents called me last March, crying and carrying on about your mom needing emergency surgery. Said the insurance wouldn't cover it and they needed $15,000 immediately or she might die." My stomach dropped. "What kind of surgery?" "That's just it, they were really vague about the details. Said it was female problems, that Carol was too embarrassed to discuss it, but that it was life-threatening and needed to happen within 48 hours. They had me so panicked I emptied most of my savings and wired them the money that same day." "And was Mom actually sick?" Jake laughed bitterly. 2 weeks later, I saw photos on your mom's Facebook of her and Dennis on some camping trip, hiking and having a great time. When I called to ask how the surgery went, she claimed it had been postponed, but that they'd already spent the money on pre-surgical consultations and couldn't get refunds. I felt sick. "Jake, I'm so sorry." "I had no idea There's more," he interrupted. I started asking around the family, and it turns out Uncle Robert got hit for $8,000 about 6 months before my situation. They told him Tyler had been in a car accident and needed money for medical bills since he didn't have insurance. Uncle Robert was my dad's older brother, a retired mechanic living on a fixed income. $8,000 would have been a huge chunk of his savings. "Did you verify whether Tyler had actually been in an accident?" "I tried to, but you know how Tyler is with communication. Never answers his phone, never responds to messages. By the time I finally got hold of him about a month later, he claimed he didn't remember any car accident, but that he might have had a minor fender bender that wasn't worth mentioning." I was starting to see a pattern, and it made me feel nauseated. "Jake, how much total do you think they've gotten from family members with these fake emergencies?" "Based on what I know for sure, at least 23,000. But I suspect there's more we don't know about. Your parents have gotten really good at playing family members against each other, making each of us think we're the only one they've approached for help." After I hung up with Jake, I made a list of all our extended family members and started making calls. The pattern that emerged was both sophisticated and heartbreaking. My parents, along with Tyler and his girlfriend Crystal, had been running elaborate cons on our family for over 2 years. Aunt Linda had given them $4,000 for Tyler's supposed tuition payments. Cousin Michelle had been hit for $6,000 when they claimed Dennis needed emergency dental work. Even my elderly grandmother had been manipulated into giving them $1,200 for what they claimed were utility bills to keep their electricity from being shut off. But the most shocking revelation came from my uncle Robert himself, when I finally worked up the courage to call him directly. "Brianna, honey, I'm glad you called," Robert said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I've been wondering if I should reach out to you about your parents, but I didn't want to cause family drama." "Uncle Robert, Jake told me about the money they got from you for Tyler's supposed car accident. I think they might be trying to scam me too." "It's worse than Jake knows," Robert said quietly. "They didn't just get $8,000 from me for Tyler's accident. Over the past year and a half, they've gotten almost 20,000 total. Different emergencies, different sob stories, always with some urgent deadline that meant I had to act immediately without verification. $20,000 from Uncle Robert alone. My heart was breaking for this kind man who'd worked his entire life and was now being systematically robbed by his own family. The thing is, Robert continued, I started getting suspicious after the fourth or fifth emergency, so I hired someone to investigate. What I found out will shock you, Brianna. This isn't just about them stealing from family. They're working with someone, some kind of mentor who's teaching them how to run these cons more effectively. What do you mean, a mentor? His name is Frank Miller. He's a family friend from way back, someone your dad knew from his factory days. Turns out Miller has been running similar scams on families for years. He teaches people how to identify the most financially stable family members, how to create emotional urgency, how to prevent victims from verifying their stories. Your parents have been his students, and we've all been their homework assignments. The room was spinning. Not only were my parents stealing from family members, but they were being coached by a professional con artist. Everything about their phone call to me, from the emotional manipulation to the refusal to provide verifiable details, had been calculated and rehearsed. Uncle Robert, we have to stop this. We have to protect the rest of the family. I agree, but it's complicated. Their family, Brianna. And they're getting desperate. The amounts they're asking for keep getting bigger, which means they're either in serious financial trouble themselves, or they're funding something that requires a lot of money. That's when I remembered what Jake Morrison had told me about Tyler and Crystal in Las Vegas, posting photos of expensive restaurants and shopping trips. They weren't in financial trouble. They were living a lavish lifestyle funded by stealing from their own family members. As I hung up with Uncle Robert, one more horrifying thought occurred to me. If they'd been running these cons for over 2 years, and if the amounts kept getting bigger, then my $22,000 emergency wasn't just another scam. It was likely the biggest scam they'd ever attempted, which meant I had been specifically targeted as their highest value victim. The responsible daughter who never asked for help. The one with the stable job and the savings account. The one who'd been carefully monitored and assessed to determine exactly how much I could afford to lose. I wasn't just the victim of a random family emergency scam. I was the culmination of a long-term plan to extract as much money as possible from the Walsh family tree. And tomorrow, I was going to start fighting back. The next morning, my parents escalated their psychological warfare to a level I hadn't thought possible. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop for 3 hours. First Mom, then Dad, then both of them together on speakerphone, each call more desperate and manipulative than the last. Brianna, Tyler tried to hurt himself last night. Carol sobbed into the phone during call number 4. The guards found him just in time. He said he can't take being locked up anymore, that he'd rather die than spend years in prison. Is that what you want? Do you want your brother's death on your conscience because you were too selfish to help your own family? The suicide threats were a new low, even for them, but they were also a clear escalation that told me how desperate they were getting. I'd been stalling for almost 24 hours now, claiming I needed time to arrange the wire transfer, and they were obviously panicking. Mom, I told you I'm working on getting the money together. These things take time. Time Tyler doesn't have. Dennis shouted in the background. Every hour you delay is another hour your brother suffers. We raised you better than this, Brianna. We taught you about family loyalty and sacrifice. But the individual calls from my parents were nothing compared to what happened next. Starting around 10 a.m., my phone began ringing with calls from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Cousins, aunts, uncles, even my 87-year-old grandmother, all of them calling to guilt-trip me into helping Tyler. Brianna, dear, your mother called me in tears, Grandma Rose said, her voice frail and confused. She said Tyler is in terrible trouble and you're the only one who can help him. Surely you can spare some money for your little brother? You've always been the successful one in the family. It broke my heart to hear my grandmother being manipulated like this, but it also showed me how far my parents were willing to go. They were recruiting elderly family members who didn't understand the full situation to apply emotional pressure on me. The calls continued throughout the day. Aunt Melissa crying about how Tyler had always been such a sweet boy and didn't deserve to rot in prison. Cousin David lecturing me about family responsibility and how blood was thicker than water. Uncle Patrick suggesting that maybe I'd forgotten my roots since moving to the big city and getting a fancy job. By noon, I felt completely isolated and under siege. The entire Walsh family network had been turned against me, and they were all convinced that I was a selfish, successful daughter who was abandoning her brother in his time of need. That's when Frank Miller called. "Brianna? This is Frank Miller. I'm an old friend of your father's from the factory days. Your parents asked me to reach out because they're so worried about this situation with Tyler." Miller's voice was smooth, practiced, with just the right blend of concern and authority. This was the man who'd been coaching my parents on how to run these scams, and hearing him speak, I understood why they'd been so effective. "Mr. Miller, I appreciate your concern, but this is really a family matter." "Of course it is, and I wouldn't normally get involved in family business. But Brianna, I've known your parents for over 20 years, and I've never seen them this distraught. They're beside themselves with worry about Tyler. And frankly, they're confused about why you're hesitating to help." "I'm not hesitating to help. I'm trying to verify the information they've given me, which has been difficult because they won't provide any concrete details about Tyler's arrest." Miller chuckled, and the sound made my skin crawl. "Brianna, I understand you work in business, so you're used to documentation and verification. But this is family we're talking about. Sometimes you have to trust the people who love you most. Your parents wouldn't lie to you about something this serious." Except they would, and they had, and Miller knew it because he'd been helping them do it. "Your brother is in a very dark place right now," Miller continued. "The guards are concerned about his mental state. Between you and me, Dennis is worried that Tyler might try to hurt himself again if he doesn't see some hope soon. Are you really willing to risk your brother's life over paperwork?" The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Miller expertly applying every psychological pressure point my parents had already tried. Family loyalty, guilt about success, threats about Tyler's mental health, time pressure, emotional manipulation disguised as friendly concern. He was a master at his craft, and I could see why so many families had fallen victim to his guidance. But then he made a mistake. "The good news is that we've found a way to expedite the bail process," Miller said. "Instead of going through official channels, there's a bail bondsman who can work with us off the books. It'll cost the full $22,000 instead of just 10%, but it means Tyler can be out by tonight instead of waiting for the courts to process everything next week. Off the books. Full payment instead of 10%. Every single detail Miller was giving me was designed to explain away the inconsistencies I'd already noticed, but they were also clearly the marks of a scam operation. After I hung up with Miller, my phone rang again immediately. This time it was my best friend Haley, who I'd known since high school. "Brianna, I hope you don't mind me calling about this, but your mom reached out to me earlier today." My stomach dropped. What did she want? "She asked if I knew anything about your financial situation. How much you make, whether you have savings, if you've mentioned any big expenses coming up. She said they were worried about asking you for help with Tyler's bail if money was tight for you." This was the betrayal that finally broke something inside me. Not only were my parents scamming me, but they'd recruited my best friend to spy on my finances. They'd been monitoring my social media, tracking my salary information, probably analyzing my spending habits to determine exactly how much they could extract from me. "Haley, what did you tell her?" "I didn't tell her anything specific, but I did mention that you seemed to be doing well financially, that you'd talked about building up your emergency fund." "Brianna, I hope that was okay. I was just trying to help. Is Tyler really in jail?" I explained the entire situation to Haley, who was horrified that she'd been manipulated into providing intelligence for a family scam operation. But her information helped me understand something crucial. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a carefully planned operation that had been targeting me specifically for months, possibly years. Later that evening, I discovered just how carefully planned it had been. While reviewing my credit report as part of my investigation, I found accounts I'd never opened. Credit cards in my name that had been opened 2 years ago, with thousands of dollars in charges I'd never made. My parents hadn't just been planning to scam me for $22,000. They'd already been stealing from me for years through identity theft, damaging my credit and racking up debt in my name. The family I'd trusted and loved had been systematically robbing me while convincing me that I was the selfish one for asking questions. Tomorrow, I was going to start fighting back. And I was going to make sure that every family member who'd been victimized by their operation got justice. I spent that night wide awake, not from anxiety this time, but from cold, calculating anger. My family hadn't just betrayed my trust, they'd committed multiple felonies including identity theft, wire fraud, and elder abuse. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. This was about protecting future victims and making sure my parents faced consequences for what they'd done. The first call I made Thursday morning was to attorney Jennifer Park, a family law specialist who'd been recommended by Jake Morrison. I needed to understand my legal options and figure out how to proceed without making things worse for the family members who'd already been victimized. What you're describing is systematic financial abuse, Park told me after I'd explained the situation. The identity theft alone is a federal crime. But before we talk about criminal charges, we need to focus on protecting you and gathering evidence. Park explained that my best strategy would be to pretend to cooperate with my parents' demands while secretly recording our conversations and documenting their lies. She also recommended that I contact the Federal Trade Commission about the identity theft and begin the process of disputing the fraudulent accounts on my credit report. The goal is to build an airtight case while preventing them from victimizing anyone else, Park said. Are you prepared for the emotional consequences of prosecuting your own parents? The question hit hard, but I thought about Uncle Robert working his entire life only to have his retirement savings stolen by family members. I thought about my elderly grandmother being manipulated into giving away money she couldn't afford to lose. I thought about all the future victims who would be targeted if we didn't stop this now. Yes, I'm prepared. My next call was to Detective Rodriguez at the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. I'd expected to be shuffled off to some low-priority desk, but Rodriguez took my case seriously from the moment I mentioned multi-state fraud and elder abuse. We've been seeing more of these family-based financial scams lately, Rodriguez told me. The emotional manipulation makes victims less likely to report, and when they do report, they often don't want to press charges against family members. Can you come in this afternoon to give a formal statement? While I waited for my appointment with Detective Rodriguez, I decided to set up a recorded phone call with my parents. Washington is a two-party consent state for recording, so I couldn't secretly record them, but I could openly record while claiming it was for my own financial records. I called the number they'd given me earlier, and Dennis answered on the first ring. Brianna. Finally. We've been waiting for you to call back. Did you arrange the wire transfer? I'm working on it, Dad, but my bank requires documentation for large transfers. I need to record our conversation for their compliance department. Is that okay? Sure, whatever they need. Just tell me you have good news about the money. I can transfer $22,000 today, but I need you to confirm some details for the bank. What's Tyler's booking number at the jail? His what? His booking number. Every arrest generates a booking number that the bail bondsman should have given you. Silence. Then, we don't have that information memorized, Brianna. We're not lawyers. We're just parents trying to help our son. Okay. What about the name of the arresting officer? Or the case number? Or even just confirmation of which jail he's being held at? Why are you making this so complicated? Carol had grabbed the phone, and her voice was sharp with frustration. We told you he needs $22,000 for bail. That's all you need to know. Mom, I understand you're upset, but I'm trying to help. If I'm going to wire this much money, I need to make sure it's going to the right place for the right reasons. The right place is helping your brother. Dennis was back on the phone, shouting now. The right reason is keeping him out of prison. What's happened to you, Brianna? When did you become so suspicious of your own family? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I became suspicious when I called 6 police departments and found out Tyler isn't in jail anywhere in Washington state. The silence that followed lasted almost 30 seconds. That's impossible, Carol finally said, but her voice had lost all its earlier hysteria. The police must have made mistakes in their systems. All 6 departments? Plus the sheriff's offices? Plus the state police database. Brianna, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but your brother needs help and you're wasting time with conspiracy theories. Dennis's voice was cold now, calculating rather than emotional. It's not a conspiracy theory, Dad. I hired a private investigator who found Tyler yesterday afternoon. He's in Las Vegas with Crystal, staying at the Bellagio and posting photos of expensive meals on social media. Another long silence. You hired a private investigator to spy on your own family? Carol's voice was incredulous, but underneath the shock, I could hear something else. Relief. Like she was glad the charade was finally over. I hired an investigator to verify a story that didn't make sense. And what I found out is that Tyler isn't in jail, never has been in jail, and that this entire emergency is completely fabricated. Brianna, you don't understand the full situation, Dennis said, his tone shifting to a different kind of manipulation. Tyler is in a different kind of trouble in Vegas. Gambling trouble. He owes some very dangerous people a lot of money, and if he doesn't pay them back, he could get seriously hurt. Even after being caught in their original lie, they were pivoting to a new version of events. This was exactly the kind of sophisticated manipulation that Frank Miller had been teaching them. So he's not in jail for drug possession. Now it's gambling debts to dangerous people. What will the story be tomorrow, Dad? Kidnapped by aliens? Being held hostage by international terrorists? Don't you dare mock this situation. Carol screamed. Tyler could die if he doesn't get this money. Then tell me exactly who he owes money to. Give me names, addresses, phone numbers. Let me call these dangerous people directly and arrange a payment plan. They couldn't, of course, because the dangerous people didn't exist any more than the drug arrest had existed. But listening to them scramble for new lies, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. They weren't just running financial scams. They were escalating. The amounts were getting bigger, the lies more elaborate, the psychological manipulation more sophisticated. This wasn't going to stop with me. If I gave them $22,000, they'd be back in 6 months asking for $30,000. Then $50,000. Then whatever amount they thought they could extract before their victims caught on. I'm not sending any money, I said quietly. And I'm going to make sure Uncle Robert and Jake and everyone else you've scammed knows exactly what you've been doing. Brianna, you'll destroy this family, Dennis said, his voice carrying a threat that made my skin crawl. No, Dad. You already destroyed this family. I'm just making sure no one else gets hurt. I hung up and immediately called Detective Rodriguez to let him know that my parents were aware their scam had been exposed. From this point forward, they were going to be dangerous in ways I couldn't predict. But I wasn't going to face them alone. Tomorrow, I was going to start building an alliance of victims who were ready to fight back. Friday morning brought a development I hadn't expected. My phone rang at 7 a.m. with a call from my cousin Jake, but his voice was tight with anger instead of his usual friendly tone. Brianna, what the hell did you say to your parents yesterday? Uncle Dennis called me at midnight screaming about how you were trying to destroy the family with lies and conspiracy theories. My heart sank. I'd hoped Jake would be an ally in exposing my parents' fraud operation, but it sounded like they'd gotten to him first with their version of events. Jake, I found out that Tyler isn't in jail. He's in Las Vegas spending money while Mom and Dad try to scam me for $22,000. The same way they scammed you for $15,000 last year. Brianna, I think you're confused. Uncle Dennis explained that you hired some sketchy private investigator who gave you false information. Tyler is in protective custody, which is why normal databases don't show his arrest. The family is trying to help him, and you're making everything worse by refusing to contribute. I felt like I was losing my mind. My parents had somehow convinced Jake that my investigation was wrong, that I was the problem, that Tyler really was in some kind of legal trouble that required special handling. Jake, the private investigator I hired, isn't sketchy. He's licensed and bonded, and he found Tyler using Tyler's own credit card records and social media posts. Tyler checked into the Bellagio hotel using his real name. That doesn't prove anything. Maybe he's there as part of some kind of witness protection situation. Maybe the authorities moved him there for his own safety. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Jake defending my parents and questioning my motives. By the time I hung up, I realized that my parents had been busy overnight, calling family members with a counter-narrative that painted me as the villain. But then my phone rang again, and this time it was Uncle Robert. "Brianna, your father called me last night with some story about you causing trouble for Tyler's legal situation. But I want you to know that I don't believe a word of it." The relief in my voice was audible. "Uncle Robert, thank God." I was starting to think I was going crazy. "Honey, I've been dealing with their lies for over a year. I know how convincing they can be, especially when they're desperate." "Did you really find Tyler in Las Vegas?" I explained everything to Uncle Robert, including the evidence from Jake Morrison and the recorded phone call where my parents had admitted Tyler wasn't in jail. Robert listened without interruption, occasionally making disgusted sounds at the worst parts. "I'm ready to stop this," Robert said when I finished. "I've been collecting evidence for months, trying to decide what to do about it. If you're willing to press charges, I'll support you with everything I have." "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records showing all the money they've extracted from family members. Email communications where they contradict their own stories. Even some recorded phone calls from when I started getting suspicious and began documenting their lies." This was the break I'd been hoping for. Robert had been ahead of me in recognizing the scam, and he'd been gathering evidence that could support criminal charges. "There's something else you need to know," Robert continued. "I did some research on Frank Miller, their mentor. He's been running these family fraud operations for over a decade. There are at least 3 other families in Oregon and California who've filed police reports about him teaching relatives how to run financial scams." "Are those families pressing charges?" "2 of them are. And here's the interesting part. Miller's method is always the same. He identifies a financially stable family member, usually someone who's moved away and become successful, then teaches the local family how to run increasingly elaborate cons until they can extract one massive final payment." A chill ran down my spine. The final payment. Exactly. Your $22,000 emergency wasn't just another scam, Brianna. It was supposed to be the last one, the big score that would set them up for a long time before they disappeared or moved on to targeting a different family. That afternoon, I met with Detective Rodriguez and Attorney Park to coordinate our legal strategy. Rodriguez had already started investigating Frank Miller based on the information I'd provided, and what he'd found was disturbing. Miller has been connected to family fraud operations across the Pacific Northwest for years, Rodriguez explained. The problem is that most victims don't want to press charges against their own relatives, so he's managed to avoid serious consequences. But this case is different because you have multiple family victims who are willing to testify, and you have evidence of identity theft, which makes it a federal matter. Park nodded. We're also dealing with elder abuse, given that your grandmother and Uncle Robert were targeted. That carries additional penalties under both state and federal law. What about Tyler and Crystal? I asked. Are they going to face charges too? That depends on what we find when we dig deeper. If they've been active participants in the fraud operation, then yes. If they've just been benefiting from money your parents stole, the charges might be different. Rodriguez leaned forward. Brianna, I need you to understand something. Once we move forward with this investigation, there's no going back. Your parents are going to face serious federal charges, possibly years in prison. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my grandmother giving away money she couldn't afford. I thought about Uncle Robert's retirement savings being stolen. I thought about all the future families who would be victimized if Miller and his network weren't stopped. Yes, I'm prepared. That evening, I received a call that confirmed I'd made the right decision. It was my cousin Michelle, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Brianna, I heard through the family grapevine that you've been causing problems about Tyler's legal situation, but I wanted to call and thank you. Thank me. For exposing what your parents have been doing. They got $6,000 from me last year for some fake emergency with your dad's dental work. I've felt sick about it ever since because I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know how to prove it. When Jake told me you'd hired an investigator and found out Tyler wasn't really in jail, everything clicked into place. Michelle, I'm so sorry they stole from you. Don't apologize. Just promise me you're going to see this through. Other family members are scared to speak up because they don't want to cause family drama, but this has to stop. They're getting bolder and more demanding, and somebody's going to get seriously hurt financially if we don't do something. By the end of the week, I had commitments from 5 family members to support criminal charges against my parents and Frank Miller. More importantly, we had documentation of over $50,000 in fraudulent transactions spanning 2 years. The tables had turned. My parents thought they were running one final con to extract my life savings. Instead, they'd triggered an investigation that was going to bring down their entire operation and send them to federal prison. On Sunday night, Detective Rodriguez called with an update that made my week. We've located Tyler and Crystal in Las Vegas, and we've got enough evidence to arrest them both on fraud charges. We're also moving forward with arrests for your parents and Frank Miller. This is happening fast now, Brianna. Are you ready? I was more than ready. I was determined to make sure that no other family would have to endure what the Walshes had been put through. Monday morning brought the phone call I'd been waiting for. Detective Rodriguez's voice was energized with the kind of excitement cops get when a major case starts breaking open. We executed search warrants this morning on your parents' house and Frank Miller's residence. What we found is going to blow this case wide open. What did you find? Miller had detailed files on over 30 families across 4 states. Training materials on psychological manipulation, victim profiles, financial analysis spreadsheets tracking which family members had the most money. Your family wasn't his only target, Brianna. You were part of an organized criminal enterprise that's been operating for years. The scope of what Rodriguez was describing made me feel sick. How many families has he victimized? We're still counting, but preliminary evidence suggests Miller's network has stolen over $500,000 from families in the past 5 years. Your parents weren't just his students. They were his star pupils. What about Tyler and Crystal? Las Vegas Metro arrested them yesterday evening. They were living in a $2,000 per night suite at the Bellagio, funded entirely by money stolen from your family. Crystal is cooperating with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges, and what she's telling us is very interesting. Rodriguez paused, and I could hear papers shuffling. According to Crystal, Tyler has been aware of the fraud operation for over 18 months. He wasn't just a beneficiary. He was an active participant who helped identify which family members would be the easiest targets. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My baby brother, the one I'd helped raise and supported through every challenge in his life, had been actively participating in a criminal conspiracy designed to rob his own family. There's more, Rodriguez continued. Crystal says Tyler specifically suggested targeting you for the $22,000 scam because he knew you had savings and a stable income. He told your parents that you felt guilty about being more successful than the rest of the family, and that they could use that guilt to manipulate you into giving them money. I had to sit down. Tyler hadn't just benefited from the scam. He designed it specifically to exploit my psychological weaknesses. Every word of my parents' emotional manipulation had been crafted by my own brother, who'd analyzed my personality and found the exact pressure points that would make me vulnerable. Rodriguez, I need to know something. When you arrested Tyler and Crystal, did they show any remorse? Any recognition of what they'd done to the family? Brianna, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've rarely seen perpetrators who were so callous about victimizing their own relatives. Tyler's first concern was whether his arrest would affect his credit score. Crystal wanted to know if she could keep the jewelry they'd bought with stolen money. Neither of them expressed any concern about the family members they'd hurt. After I hung up with Rodriguez, I called Attorney Park to discuss the implications of Tyler's active participation in the fraud. This actually strengthens our case significantly, Park explained. It shows conspiracy and premeditation rather than just opportunistic theft. But Brianna, it also means that Tyler is going to face serious federal charges. We're talking about years in prison, not months. He made his choice, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. He chose to target his own family for financial gain. He chose to manipulate people who loved him. He has to face the consequences. That afternoon, I received a call from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Aunt Linda, my father's sister, who had been one of the victims of my parents' earlier scams. Brianna, I want to apologize. Aunt Linda, you don't need to apologize for anything. Yes, I do. When your parents called me last week claiming you were being unreasonable about helping Tyler, I believed them. I even called a few other family members to tell them you were being selfish. I'm ashamed of myself for falling for their lies again. Linda's voice was shaky with emotion. The thing is, I knew something was wrong when they asked me for money last year. Tyler's supposed tuition emergency didn't make sense because I knew he wasn't enrolled in any school. But I wanted to believe them because they're family, and because admitting they were lying would have meant admitting I'd been fooled. You weren't fooled, Aunt Linda. You were victimized by people who are very good at what they do. That's what Detective Rodriguez said when he interviewed me this morning. He explained how these family fraud operations work, how they target people's emotions and family loyalty to prevent them from thinking clearly. Hearing it explained that way, I realized that all of us were victims of psychological manipulation, not just financial theft. Linda's call was followed by several others throughout the week. Family members who'd initially been convinced that I was the problem were now coming forward to share their own experiences with my parents' manipulation. More importantly, they were offering to testify against my parents, Tyler, and Frank Miller. Uncle Paul, who lived in California, called to tell me that my parents had attempted to scam him just 2 months ago with a fake story about needing money for Tyler's supposed rehab treatment. Cousin Sarah revealed that Tyler had contacted her directly last year, claiming he was homeless and needed money for an apartment deposit, money that had obviously been used to fund his Las Vegas lifestyle. Even my elderly grandmother, who I'd been worried about throughout this whole ordeal, called to express her support. Brianna, dear, I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up to them, Grandma Rose said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. I gave them that money because I was scared they'd cut me off from seeing Tyler if I didn't help. But I've been thinking about it, and I realized that was wrong. Families shouldn't use fear and guilt to manipulate each other. The most surprising ally emerged on Friday morning when I received a call from Jennifer Morrison, Jake Morrison's sister, who worked as a social worker specializing in financial elder abuse. Brianna, my brother told me about your case, and I wanted to offer my help. I've been working with families victimized by financial fraud for over 10 years, and what happened to your family is a textbook case of organized family abuse. What do you mean by organized family abuse? It's when family members collaborate to systematically steal from their relatives using emotional manipulation and psychological pressure. It's more common than people think, but it's rarely prosecuted because victims are embarrassed and reluctant to send family members to prison. Morrison explained that she'd been tracking Frank Miller's operation for several years, trying to build a case that would shut him down permanently. Miller is particularly dangerous because he specifically targets successful family members who've moved away from their hometowns. He exploits the guilt they feel about their success and their distance from family to make them vulnerable to financial manipulation. How many families has he destroyed? More than we'll probably ever know. But your case is different, Brianna. You have multiple victims willing to testify, extensive documentation, and evidence of interstate fraud. This could be the case that finally puts Miller away for good. By the end of the week, our alliance included 8 family members who'd been victimized, 3 law enforcement agencies, 2 attorneys, and a social worker who specialized in financial family abuse. What had started as my parents' attempt to steal $22,000 had triggered an investigation that was exposing a multi-state criminal enterprise. Detective Rodriguez called Friday evening with the final piece of good news I'd been waiting for. Federal prosecutors have agreed to take the case. Your parents, Tyler, Crystal, and Frank Miller are all facing federal conspiracy charges that carry sentences of 10 to 20 years. The trial is going to be a big deal, Brianna. Are you ready to see this through to the end? I thought about Uncle Robert's stolen retirement savings. I thought about my grandmother being manipulated into giving away money she couldn't afford. I thought about all the future families who would be safe if we succeeded in stopping Miller's operation. I'm ready, I said. Let's put these people away. The federal investigation moved with a speed that surprised everyone involved. Within 3 weeks of the initial arrests, prosecutors had built a case so comprehensive that Frank Miller's defense attorney was already talking about a plea bargain. Miller knows he's looking at 20 years minimum if this goes to trial, Attorney Park explained during our weekly update meeting. He's been offering to cooperate with the government in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing information about other fraud operations he's been involved with. Detective Rodriguez nodded. Miller's cooperation has been invaluable. We've identified 12 other family fraud networks operating across the western United States, all of them using techniques Miller taught them. This investigation has become the largest family financial fraud case in the region's history. The scope of Miller's criminal enterprise was staggering. Federal agents had seized financial records showing that his network had stolen over $2 million from families across 7 states over the past decade. My family had been just one target in a vast criminal operation that had destroyed dozens of families' financial security. What about my parents and Tyler? I asked. Are they cooperating too? Rodriguez's expression darkened. That's where things get complicated. Your parents are maintaining that they're innocent victims who were manipulated by Miller. They claim they really believe Tyler was in legal trouble and that they were just trying to help him. And Tyler is taking a completely different approach. He's claiming that your parents forced him to participate in the scams, that he was coerced into going along with their fraud operations. He's trying to position himself as a victim rather than a perpetrator. I felt sick hearing this. Even facing federal charges, my family members were still lying, still trying to manipulate the system, still refusing to take responsibility for what they'd done to their own relatives. But the federal prosecutors weren't buying any of their stories. The evidence was too comprehensive, the pattern of behavior too clear, the financial records too detailed. My parents and Tyler had made a fatal mistake when they targeted me because my investigation had uncovered years of criminal activity that couldn't be explained away as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. The first breakthrough came when Crystal, facing the possibility of 20 years in federal prison, decided to cooperate fully with the investigation. Her testimony revealed details about the fraud operation that I found heartbreaking and infuriating. Crystal confirmed that Tyler had been planning to target you specifically for over a year, Rodriguez told me after her debriefing. He'd been monitoring your social media, tracking your career progress, even asking other family members about your financial situation. The $22,000 emergency wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of a long-term plan to extract as much money as possible from you before moving on to other targets. Other targets? According to Crystal, Tyler and your parents had already identified 3 other family members they planned to scam after finishing with you. Your cousin Jake was next on their list, followed by your Uncle Robert's daughter Michelle. They had detailed financial profiles on all of them. The systematic nature of their planning was chilling. My family hadn't just stolen money from relatives. They'd been operating like a criminal enterprise, with target lists and financial analysis and long-term strategic planning. 2 months after the initial arrests, the federal prosecutor's office announced they were ready to proceed with the case. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, elder abuse, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Miller is facing life in prison under the federal 3 strikes law, the prosecutor explained during a victims' meeting. Your parents are each facing 15 to 20 years. Tyler and Crystal are looking at 10 to 15 years, assuming they don't negotiate plea agreements. The victims' impact statements were scheduled for the following week, and I'd been asked to speak on behalf of all the family members who'd been victimized. It was going to be the most difficult thing I'd ever done, but also the most important. Standing in federal court the following Tuesday, looking across the courtroom at my parents, my brother, and Frank Miller, I felt a strange sense of peace. These people had stolen from their own family members, exploited the trust and love of the people who cared about them most, and shown no remorse for the damage they'd caused. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. The defendants didn't just steal money from their family members. They stole our ability to trust, our sense of safety, our belief that family means something sacred and protected. I looked directly at Tyler as I continued. My brother knew exactly how to manipulate me because he'd spent his entire life learning my weaknesses and vulnerabilities. He used my love for him as a weapon against me, and he used my success as a reason to justify stealing from me. Then I turned to my parents. Dennis and Carol Walsh taught me about family loyalty and sacrifice. But they perverted those values, using them as tools to extract money from the people who loved them most. They turned family gatherings into opportunities for financial reconnaissance. They turned family relationships into criminal conspiracies. The sentencing took place 3 weeks later. Frank Miller received 25 years in federal prison. My parents each received 18 years. Tyler received 15 years. Crystal, in exchange for her cooperation, received 8 years with the possibility of parole after 5. After the sentencing, I stood outside the federal courthouse with Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, and the other family members who'd been victimized. We'd been through something terrible together, but we'd also found strength in standing up for ourselves and protecting future victims. "It's over," Uncle Robert said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "They can't hurt anyone else now." But I knew it wasn't really over. The damage they'd done to our family relationships would take years to heal. The financial losses would take time to recover from. The ability to trust family members would have to be rebuilt slowly and carefully. Still, justice had been served. And more importantly, Frank Miller's criminal network had been dismantled, protecting hundreds of potential future victims from the kind of systematic family abuse we'd endured. As I drove home that evening, I realized that the most important thing I'd learned from this experience wasn't about fraud or family betrayal. It was about the difference between enabling harmful behavior and supporting the people you love. Sometimes protecting your family means holding them accountable for their actions, even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful. 6 months after the federal sentencing, I sat in my therapist's office reflecting on how much my life had changed. The woman looking back at me from Dr. Sarah Chen's office window was stronger than the person who'd answered that desperate phone call at 1 a.m. all those months ago. "How are you feeling about the family situation now?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice gentle but probing. "Different," I said, searching for the right words. I used to think that being a good family member meant saying yes to everything, never questioning anyone's motives, always putting family needs ahead of my own well-being. Now I understand that real love sometimes requires setting boundaries, even when those boundaries are painful. The therapy had been crucial for processing the trauma of discovering that the people I'd trusted most had been systematically manipulating and stealing from me for years. But it had also helped me understand something important about myself and my relationship with family. I realize now that I was so afraid of being seen as selfish or successful that I made myself vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation my parents and Tyler used against me. I continued. They knew I felt guilty about my success, so they weaponized that guilt. Dr. Chen nodded. "And how do you feel about that guilt now?" "It's mostly gone. I earned my success through hard work and smart choices. I don't owe anyone my financial security just because we share DNA. Family relationships should be built on mutual respect and genuine care, not financial obligation and emotional manipulation." The healing process had been supported by the other family members who'd been victimized. Uncle Robert and I had grown closer than we'd ever been, bonded by our shared experience and our determination to rebuild healthy family relationships. Aunt Linda had become like a second mother to me, checking in regularly and offering the kind of unconditional support I'd never received from my actual parents. Even my grandmother, despite her advanced age, had become a source of wisdom and strength. "Brianna, dear," she told me just last week, "I'm proud of you for standing up to them." I should have done it years ago when I first suspected something was wrong, but I was scared of losing family connections. Now I realize that connections built on fear and manipulation aren't worth preserving. The financial recovery had been more successful than I'd expected. The federal government had seized assets from Frank Miller's operation and distributed restitution to victims. I'd recovered about 60% of the money that had been stolen from me through identity theft, and my credit had been completely restored. Uncle Robert had received about 40% of his losses back, which wasn't everything but was enough to secure his retirement. More importantly, the investigation had led to the discovery and prosecution of Miller's entire network. Federal authorities had shut down 12 other family fraud operations and recovered over $800,000 for victims across multiple states. The case had become a model for how to investigate and prosecute family financial abuse. I'd also become something I'd never expected to be, an advocate. Jennifer Morrison had connected me with other survivors of family financial abuse, and I'd started speaking at conferences and workshops about recognizing the warning signs and protecting yourself from manipulation. The hardest part for most people to understand, I'd explained at a recent conference, is that family financial abuse doesn't look like stranger fraud. It looks like people who love you asking for help. It looks like emergencies and crises and urgent deadlines. It looks like guilt trips about family loyalty and accusations that you're being selfish. The speaking engagements had been emotionally difficult, but also healing. Every time I shared my story, I met other people who'd been through similar experiences, and we found strength in recognizing that we weren't alone. My relationship with the honest members of my family had grown stronger than it had ever been. We'd learned to communicate more directly, to ask questions when something didn't make sense, and to support each other without enabling destructive behavior. Jake, my cousin who'd initially been manipulated into defending my parents, had become one of my closest allies. "I'm sorry I doubted you at first," he'd told me. "But I learned something important from that experience." When someone you love is making accusations about family members that seem hard to believe, the right response isn't to automatically dismiss them. The right response is to listen and investigate and support them through the process of finding the truth. The most surprising development had been a letter I'd received from Tyler just last month. He was serving his sentence at a federal prison in Oregon, and his letter was the first communication I'd had from him since his arrest. "Brianna," he'd written, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I know what I did to you and to our family was unforgivable. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses. I'm writing to tell you that you were right to turn us in, and I'm glad you did." The letter had continued for 3 pages, with Tyler taking full responsibility for his actions and acknowledging the damage he'd caused to family relationships. He'd explained that prison had given him time to understand how distorted his thinking had become, how he'd justified stealing from family members by convincing himself that we owed him something. "I don't expect you to ever want a relationship with me again," the letter had concluded. "But I want you to know that stopping us was the right thing to do, and I'm grateful that you had the courage to do what the rest of us were too selfish and cowardly to do." I hadn't responded to the letter yet, and I wasn't sure I ever would. Forgiveness was a process that couldn't be rushed, and I wasn't ready to rebuild trust with someone who'd spent years systematically betraying me. But reading Tyler's letter had given me something I'd been missing: closure. He understood what he'd done. He acknowledged the harm he'd caused. He wasn't trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for him or giving him another chance. That was enough for now. "So, what have you learned about family relationships through all of this?" Dr. Chen asked, bringing me back to the present moment. "I've learned that healthy families are built on honesty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Unhealthy families use guilt, manipulation, and emotional blackmail to control each other. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to hold them accountable for their harmful behavior, even when it means they face serious consequences." I paused, thinking about Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda and my grandmother, and all the other family members who'd stood by me throughout this ordeal. I've also learned that you can choose your family. Not the one you're born into, but the one you build through mutual respect and genuine care. The people who support you through the hardest times, who celebrate your successes without resentment, who tell you the truth even when it's difficult to hear. Those are your real family members, whether they share your DNA or not. As I left Dr. Chen's office that afternoon, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to 6 months ago. I had less money in my savings account, but more security in my relationships. I had fewer family members in my life, but healthier connections with the ones who remained. I had experienced betrayal and trauma, but I'd also discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust myself, to question stories that didn't make sense, to investigate when something felt wrong, to set boundaries when people tried to manipulate me, to choose love over fear, truth over comfort, healthy relationships over toxic ones. The $22,000 my parents had tried to steal from me had been just money. What I'd gained by fighting back was far more valuable: self-respect, genuine family relationships, the knowledge that I could protect myself and others from harm, and the peace that comes from living authentically. 6 months ago, I'd been a successful marketing director who thought family meant saying yes to everything. Now I was a survivor, an advocate, and a woman who understood the difference between love and manipulation. The phone call that had woken me up at 1 a.m. had been intended to destroy my financial security. Instead, it had led to the most important growth of my life. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between protecting yourself and keeping peace with family members? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest, but that doesn't mean we have to accept their harmful behavior. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and finding strength in difficult situations. Share this video with anyone who might be dealing with family manipulation or financial abuse, because sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward getting help. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting my journey toward healing and justice. Remember that setting boundaries with toxic family members isn't cruel, it's necessary. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when they try to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Take care of yourselves out there, and remember that you deserve relationships built on respect and honesty, not fear and manipulation.